Hello Hwa Chong students, I'm Mr. Kelvin Tan. Welcome to this home-based learning video where I'll be teaching you how to tackle the TYS 2020 Essay 5B. This essay is on the aging population of Singapore. Here is the question. So I'll let you read on your own. So as you can see, this question is telling you that the population in Singapore is aging, and of course there will be significant consequences for our economy. So part A you are supposed to do on your own. So when it comes to the economic consequences, make sure you talk about the impact on the macro goals of Singapore in part A. So if you look at part B, okay, part B, so let's move on to the next slide. We are going to focus on part B for this video. So in part B, right, you are supposed to discuss the policy measures that Singapore's government should take to address the economic consequences of these population changes on its economy. So you can see again the connection between part A and part B. So in part A, you would have already explained the impact on the Singapore economy. So for part B, right, you should focus on the policies that can correct these negative impacts. As usual, right, for questions involving policies, okay, for part B essays including policies, that is on policies, many students love to do macro questions on policies. I'm sure in your coming TPE, right, in your coming mid-year exam, you'll be hoping that at least two macro questions that you are able to do, and hopefully both macro questions that you are doing will be on policies, because after all this time, right, after your FA2, okay, when it comes to the standard structure for economic policies, I believe all of us are very familiar with this structure by now, which is basically for R1 you explain policy 1, followed by E1 you explain a limitation of policy 1, next R2 where you explain policy 2, followed by E2, where you explain a limitation of policy 2. Then finally, when it comes to E3, right, you are coming up with a summative conclusion where it's either which policy is the best, or in this case, overall, are the policies going to be effective in handling the consequences that comes from an aging population in Singapore. So as I was telling every student, and let me remind you again, students love to do questions on policies because part B is quite clear. You do R1, E1, R2, E2, followed by E3. Try not to again jump from point to point. Don't talk about R1, then R2, then go back to R1 again, then R2, and certainly don't leave your evaluation points to the end. So think of R to the E, to the R to the E, and finally to the E. Okay, this is like something like a rap sequence, right? R to the E to the R to the E to the E. So this was a rap song that your parents may have realized in the 1990s by C.J. Lewis. The song title is called R to the A. So you can take a look at it. You can listen to it in your free time, or you can ask your parents about it. Now, let me give you some background to this question. When it comes to the policies, right, it's good for you to be aware of what are the standard policies that Singapore typically use for aging population. So let me give you a simple historical background that will be relevant for this question, and who knows, can be relevant to your general paper as well in the future. It's good to note that ever since 1998, I recall I just graduated from NUS in 1998. And I recall in the National Day rally speech by our then Prime Minister Goh Chok Tong, he talks about the French World Cup team that took part in the World Cup, I believe, in 1998. And where he did talk about this particular French player called Zinedine Zidane. But basically his point is this: he saw the French football team in the 1998 World Cup where many of the players, right, none of them are actually indigenous to France. I mean, their parents typically came to France as immigrants, and because his point then was that because France are willing to open up their country to immigrants, they are able to churn out such a world-class football team with such good players that can go all the way to the World Cup in 1998. And he wanted Singapore to be like that. So I think ever since 1998, right, Singapore has been steadily opening her doors to foreign immigration. Yeah, I mean, when I recall in my university days, right, before 1998, Singapore was very different. So the Singapore today is vastly different from Singapore during my university days. So for this question, right, one of the R's I'll recommend students always use our immigration policy. It's one of those policies that we have been using for many years. Okay, since I would say the launching point was in 1998, where it addressed our declining younger population and our aging older population very well in Singapore. So one of the R should be the immigration policy. Then of course for the R2, right, a good second policy, okay, would be the standard education and retraining policy of Singapore, basically to make sure that even as our population ages, the workers can still continue to work and be just as productive. So I will let you have some chance to read this structure. So this structure is very similar to the 2021 essay on grammar. And if you recall, right, you just had a FA2, okay, just recently. You would have gotten back your FA2 script by this week. And you realize that in the FA2, there was a 10-mark question on Vietnam. And you realize that there are also two policies that we talk about. Okay, should Vietnam focus on comparative advantage, or should Vietnam do a spending on education and technology in order to boost trade and to boost growth? So the structure in that FA2 10-mark question and the structure of this essay, part B, is exactly the same. So as you read this, right, I hope that when you go for your TPE, that is after your June holidays, okay, you understand that the structure for all these policy questions is very standard, and it'll be a foolish thing for students to ignore the structure and not write like that. So for this part B, right, R1 should be to explain how immigration policy can address the economic consequences on Singapore from the aging population. Then E1, explain one limitation of immigration policy. Followed by R2, you explain how another policy, in this case the education and retraining policy, can also address the economic consequences on Singapore from the aging population. And for E2, you explain one limitation of education and retraining. Then for your E3 for this question, right, you take an overall summative conclusion whether such policies are likely to be successful or not in handling these economic consequences coming from aging population. Let me try to give a brief explanation on each point. So when it comes to immigration, right, you want to take the time to establish how immigration policy can actually boost both actual growth and potential growth in Singapore, similar to your FA2. So let me show you how you can explain here. Now, we know that our population is aging, our workforce is shrinking. So by being open to foreign workers, right, it allows Singapore to remain dynamic and always able to develop comparative advantage in new areas in the economy. Now, we'll tell students, and I'll tell all my students, always give examples. Okay, they love to see when they set questions on the Singapore economy, and they know that only candidates from the Singapore that will do this question, they expect students to be aware of at least what is going on in their own country. So if you can give some examples, okay, that are useful and relevant, you'll be given credit. Okay, don't give a purely theoretical answer here. So a good example for how immigration has allowed Singapore to develop new comparative advantage will of course be our hospitality sector. Now I've said this a few times in other video clips. When you look at our Universal Studios, when you look at our Resort World Sentosa, when you look at our medical tourism, look at our hospitals, our private hospitals like Mount Elizabeth, Glen Eagles, it is of no surprise to anyone who goes to these places that a large proportion of the workers who work there are actually foreign workers. Okay, if you go to USS, if you go to RWS, many of the waiters, waitresses are not from Singapore. They are naturally from the Philippines and of course other countries as well. If you go to our private hospitals, you realize that many of the nurses and quite a few doctors are also foreign trained. So thanks to these inflow of foreign workers, we are able to develop new comparative advantage. Nowadays, in our hospitals, right, many foreign patients, they especially fly to Singapore, okay, for healthcare. So we call this medical tourism. And of course, while they are here, they also spend a lot on food, on okay, F&B, on luxuries. When their family members come to Singapore to visit them, come with them to the hospital, they also go to USS, RWS. So you can easily see that there's plenty of multiplier impact that's going on in Singapore. So this is how, by allowing immigration, by allowing the free flow of immigration into Singapore, it helped to reverse some of the negative consequences in your Part A. Basically, it means that there will be actual growth, okay, as our X rises, and of course, through the multiplier effect, our AD will shift a few times. And furthermore, when we allow immigration, right, it so-called supplement the quantity of workers. And of course, if we are allowing talented foreign workers to come to Singapore, even the quality of our labor, the quality of our workforce in Singapore can be enhanced. So you will not only get actual growth, but you also get potential growth. So you can see by explaining this slowly, okay, you are clearly explaining how our immigration policy does a pretty good job to boost our growth and hence reverse some of the negative consequences in Part A. So in this aspect, it's very similar to the FA2 you recently did, that 10-mark question. So you should probably draw a ADAS graph. Okay, so in your, just like your 10 marks FA2 question, as you explained what I just did in the previous slide, okay, our exports will be higher, our AD will rise, and through the multiplier effect, our national income will rise. And of course, with both the quantity and the quality of labor being increased because of immigration, the vertical AS curve will also increase. So that's where you have actual growth and potential growth. What about the standard evaluation, the standard limitation of this? Now, I'm sure you are aware of this, right? If you're living in Singapore, that when you allow all these immigrants coming to Singapore, there will be plenty of unintended consequences. Okay, the local Singaporeans may be unhappy due to the congestion, and given the small land size of Singapore, and of course, as a worker, right? If you're a local worker, if the foreign workers are similar to you, they'll be competing with you for the same jobs. So you're going to be unhappy. Okay, you may end up being structurally unemployed. Your wages end up being lower. So these are the standard limitations for the immigration policy that I'm sure all of us are well aware about. Now let's move to R2. So this will be a good way for you to link your R2 to your E1 that we just said. Now, our politicians, right, they are aware that Singapore cannot totally rely on foreign workers. So, in case you're not aware, right, our current political wisdom believe that what they like is 1/3 of our workforce should be foreign workers, but probably not more than that. So we are aiming for maybe 1/3. So our foreign workers, right, those that are not PRs, those that are not citizens, will form the max 1/3. So 2/3 will be Singaporean citizens and PRs. But of course, they are going to age. Okay, they are going to age. So how do we make sure that these aging citizens as well as PRs continue to work and continue to be productive in their workplace? So this is where your R2 will come in when it comes to education as well as retraining policies to ensure that the productivity of these workers continue to be higher. So the easiest example for students to use will be Skills Future. So this is where you explain properly that Skills Future, right, a sum of money is deposited into the personal account of every Singaporean citizen and PRs, and they can use that money to upgrade their skills anytime with education and training courses. So When Singaporeans as well as PRs use their skills future to upgrade their skills, the quality of labor would increase and hence ensure that potential growth continue to be good for Singapore. So in this case, you use your ADAS diagram to illustrate. What is the standard evaluation for this policy? Okay, this is where I think by now you begin to realize, right, that every student from every school, not just in Hwa Chong, typically memorize this evaluation of our education policy. That is that the older workers, the older Singaporeans, that those that are aging, especially, okay, especially those older workers that lack maybe university education, they could lack the attitude as well as the aptitude to take up such training courses. And of course, when you read the news, right, you realize that many Singaporeans have yet to find time to spend any of their skills future credit. You can go back and ask your parents. I think, okay, a large majority of us hasn't really touched our skills future credit yet. I recently used it to learn how to be an electrician at home, where I learned how to change the power plug, learn how to change the power socket, the light switches, and it was during the weekend. So I think this June holidays and maybe the December holidays, I'll look forward to spending more of it. But basically, a lot of Singaporeans have yet to use the skills future, so there's a possible limitation of that. And of course, other possible evaluation remarks could be that it has a long gestation period. Okay, such training costs will take time, and of course, it costs the government money, so there's opportunity costs. Now, after you talk about R1, E1, R2, E2 followed. Now let's talk about the E3 summative conclusion. So for this question, right, your summative conclusion is trying to say, overall, do you think the two policies, given the limitation that you have stressed for the E1 and E2, are they likely to be successful in mitigating some of the negative consequences that you have explained in part A from the aging population in Singapore? So there are various ways you can justify, but here's what I would do, and here's what I would advise of all of you all to do. That when it comes to Singapore policies, right, I think it's generally easier for students to take a more positive tone, okay, and take the stand that such policies are likely to be successful. Okay, it's always good to be positive, and it's always good to finish your junior college education in a very positive note. Of course, when you are positive, right, you should try to explain why you are positive, why there's reason for you to be positive. So here's my way of justifying why these two policies, the immigration policies, the education and retraining policies, are likely to be successful. Now, for the immigration policy, it's probably easier. Singapore is well known for being a country to be an economic miracle. And why are we an economic miracle? Why is it that when Lee Kuan Yew was the first prime minister, followed by Goh Chok Tong as the second prime minister, and now our third prime minister has just stepped down, Lee Hsien Loong, our real GDP per capita since our independence have been rapidly increasing? Why? I think everyone, especially the British who are marking your A-level scripts, including this particular year, they are aware that Singapore, since our independence from the British in 1959, followed by our independence from Malaysia in 1964, we have embraced free trade. And we are definitely one of the few countries in Asia to welcome foreign direct investment. And it's because of these two, right, that we have grown so much. So as we move on to embracing foreign immigration, which is your R1, it is harder. Okay, naturally for most countries, I hope you have learned from globalization, they have no problem with free trade in goods and services. They have perhaps little problem with free flow of FDI. But it's the third dimension, third aspect of globalization, that is the free flow of labor. Many countries find it harder to accept. The British had their Brexit, and we know that Singapore, we are also finding it a bit hard. Some of us may find it a bit hard to accept, but because of our history as a small and open economy, okay, there should not be significant problem in Singapore welcoming foreign immigration. You can further justify our foreign immigration policy likely to be successful with this elaboration that Singaporeans, we have a very unique and close relationship with our ruling government. Okay, in other questions, right, I've said this. We are well known and we tell the whole world that there's this special tripartite relationship between the government, the employers, as well as the workers. Okay, and not only that, our government enjoy a very high degree of trust with Singaporeans. Okay, when Mr. Lawrence Wong, right, when we know he's going to be our fourth prime minister in Singapore, he recently said in the Straits Times that reported in the Straits Times that Singapore cannot be afford to be like UAE, okay, United Arab Emirates, where I think the large part of the people in the country are actually foreigners, where citizens form a minority. So he took care to reassure Singaporeans that we won't end up like UAE, where citizens and PRs form a very small minority of the overall residents in the country. And I think that shows that we trust our government to make sure that Singaporeans are always considered first in many of the jobs. Okay, many of the jobs. And of course, you may have done this in your previous questions. We also have various policies, right, to ensure that firms in Singapore, when they want to consider whether should they employ a Singaporean, a PR, or a foreign worker, we do have various policies, right, to limit their over reliance on foreign workers. Such examples would be our work permits, which take care of the lower skilled workers, our S-Pass, which take care of the intermediate skills worker, and finally, for those foreign workers that are competing with many of us for the university jobs, these are under the realm of employment pass. So thanks to all these policies, right, I'm likely to lean more towards the point that our immigration policy is likely to be effective despite the complaints that some Singaporeans may have towards foreign immigration. And this is my final slide. When it comes to R2, when it comes to the education and retraining policies, we also have reasons to be positive. Okay, Singaporeans are used from young. Other than the fact that we have a very trusting relationship with our current ruling government, I think you know best, right? Being the youth of this generation, since young, you have been constantly reminded by MOE to upgrade your work skills. Okay, for rest of us, the government always urge us to get used to the idea that there cannot be one career for life. So we have been used from young to constantly upgrade our work skills, and our government has the money to actually spend on always giving us money to take up all these education and retraining policy. So since we have been trained from young, we trust our government, and our government has been telling us to get used to constantly upgrade our skills, and our government has the money to constantly give us for us to upgrade our skills, namely through Skills Future. So we can conclude that that policy is likely to work well as well to constantly to allow the aging resident, the aging citizens, the aging PRs of Singapore to continue working to mitigate the negative impact. So at the end of the day, right, we can safely conclude that both policies, our immigration policies and our education and retraining policies, are likely to be effective in Singapore to handle the aging population. So this is my stand. So I guess my final tip is this. When it comes to the summative conclusion, take an overall view. You are taking a helicopter view. Okay, you weigh your R1, your E1, your R2 and E2, and then you try to take a definitive stand with some form of justification. My advice is avoid merely repeating your E1 and E2 points again in your E3. So the Cambridge markers want you to see the end your answer in a very overall view with a final stand that answer the question. So if you practice this well, if you do it well, it's very easy to get good marks for this particular question. Okay, so I hope you have enjoyed yourself when you watch this video. You have learned a lot of things, both about econs as well as Singapore. And I wish you all the best when you do this essay. Thank you.